Good morning, everyone. Happy Easter. Happy Easter. This is a unique Easter date. It's April 5th today, if you don't remember, Easter moves. It's on a different date of the year. So it's an early Easter this year, and it could be later in a few years, kind of thing. Well, April 5th is understood as the actual date of the resurrection. So it's Easter. We always celebrate it, but April 5th, it's like doubly important. I just think that's really fun to know. April 5th is an important day. Next week, we kick off our 25th year celebration, as you've heard about, and our superintendent will be joining us. And that might be language you're not familiar with. If we were Catholic, this would be our version of a cardinal. So he's coming to visit with us. We're not Catholic, in case you were confused about that. But so I would encourage for you to join us for that. He's a personal friend of mine, and it's a very significant honor for us to come and be with us at church next week. So please come on out for that. And our hip-hop special that we have next week from Bobby, it's going to be amazing. And so I just need to ask you to be on your best behavior next week. Just best behavior. Actually, don't. It's fine. It's completely fine. It's completely fine. So I heard about a CEO of a major company who was faced with a critical decision, not a small one, a decision that was going to affect thousands of employees, millions of dollars, and his reputation. Behind closed doors, he knew what the right decision was. But his advisors told him he was right, what was right, the data confirmed what was right, but outside the doors, pressure was building on social media. It was exploding. Public opinion was shifting, and the crowd was getting louder and louder. At one point in the decision-making process, someone leaned over and said to him, "If you make the right decision, you're probably going to lose everything." So instead of doing what was right, he did what was safe. He didn't say it was right. He didn't say it was good. He just went along. Later on, he admitted, "I knew it wasn't right, but I couldn't afford the backlash." Now, let me ask you this today. Have any point in your life, have you ever known the right thing to do and still didn't do it? Not because you didn't know, but because of the pressure or the voices, it was just too loud. Well, 2,000 years ago, there was a man that stood in that exact moment. His name was Pontius Pilate. And he is the leader of the moment of the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, let me set the scene for you. Jerusalem is packed for Passover. Hundreds of thousands of people are filing into the city, celebrating this very important moment. They're celebrating how God once set them free from an evil empire, which is interesting because they are now once again underneath and living under an evil empire of Rome. So this is a tension point with hundreds of thousands of people. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, has come to the city to keep order with the soldiers, because moments like this can turn quickly. Crowds get emotional, tensions rise, rebellion is always just beneath the surface. And in the middle of that tension, a man is brought before Pilate. His name is Jesus. And Jesus is there for trial for a possible crucifixion. Pilate listens to the accusations, questions Jesus, and he quickly realizes that Jesus is innocent. But before he can act, in the middle of his decision-making process, he gets a message from his wife, Claudia Procula. She has had a troubling dream the night before, and she warns him, "Leave this man alone." Pilate is caught. He's caught in this place of many voices. He has a warning from his wife that says, "Leave this man alone." He has an inner voice saying, Jesus is innocent. But he has a very loud voice of the crowd demanding crucifixion. He knows what is right, But the pressure is building. The crowd is getting louder. A riot is just beginning to form. And in that moment, instead of standing in truth, Pilate tries to sidestep it and step away from it. He calls for a bowl with water, and he washes his hands in front of everybody and says, I am innocent of this man's blood. Which meant that Jesus was now free to be crucified. The truth is, you can wash your hands all you want, but your decision not to choose is still a decision. By choosing not to make a decision, he was, in fact, deciding to reject Jesus, to choose to crucify Jesus. He was responsible. Again, in the middle of the trial in Matthew 27, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message, leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night. His wife's name was Claudia Procula. She had a dream. It was different. It wasn't a regular dream. It was different from a regular dream. So it was a nightmare, a warning. It was a moment of deep spiritual interruption in her life, an unexpected spiritual awakening. She was just sleeping, and God interrupts her life. A deep disturbance, and it's a classic God move. It's classic God activity, that while you're just minding your own business, he interrupts your life. Here she is. She's living the dream life. Money, fame, luxuries, servants, 4 million Instagram followers. It's amazing. She's got fancy foods, fancy clothes, fancy everything. Her husband is a powerful political figure. She is also a spiritual pagan, meaning they worship the false gods of Jupiter, or we more commonly know him as Zeus or Hera or Ares. Her pagan faith was built on fear. It was fear-based and filled with rituals and incantations. She was spiritually aware, yet she was spiritually dead. And God is all the time at work behind trying to bring her spiritual life. God was trying to communicate to her and to Pilate. But Pilate was more concerned about the crowd. In John 18, he says, what is truth? Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and told them regarding Jesus, he is not guilty of any crime. Pay attention to that. Pilate knows Jesus is innocent. He knows Jesus is not guilty, but knowing the truth has never been the same as standing in truth. They are not the same thing. You can know the truth all day long, and it makes zero difference in your life. Matthew 27, Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere, and that a riot was developing, so he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, I'm innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours. Pilate tries to pass the buck, to pass responsibility. Pilate tries to do something impossible. He tries to stay neutral about Jesus. He wants to be the Switzerland of spirituality. Just no decision. He's not going to decide for anyone. But neutrality is a decision. He chooses to wash his hands, or he tries. He chooses safety over conviction. He chooses popularity over truth. He chooses the crowd over Christ. And in one moment, as he washes his hands, says, this man is innocent. Or he said he doesn't want any responsibility as he washes his hands. But you can wash your hands in life all day long and still carry guilt in your heart. Pilate, in the story, plays the part of a fool. He chose poorly, and he is one of history's greatest villains. Pontius Pilate killed Jesus. If he showed up on opening day at the Red Sox to throw the first pitch, he would get booed by the crowd. All right? People are not a fan of Pilate. Hey, he's the guy that was in charge when Jesus got crucified. Not a great leader. Back in December, I had the opportunity to travel to Africa, specifically the country of Ethiopia. And I didn't go thinking that I was going to learn anything about Easter because it was almost Christmas. I thought I already had a pretty good handle on the Easter story. But while in Ethiopia, I encountered one of the oldest groups of Christians in the world. It's called the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Now, I knew a little bit about the Ethiopian Orthodox Church because these are the guys that claim that they have the Ark of the Covenant hidden away. They won't show it to you, but they say they got it hidden away. So they're a little eccentric. I began to research them, and in my research, I discovered something I had never heard before. When they talk about Pilate, they don't talk about him as the bad guy who sentenced Jesus. They talk about him as a man who was ultimately changed by Jesus. And that was unusual for me to hear because where I come from, the story stops when Pilate washes his hands. Pilate has always been the villain to me, but in Ethiopia, they tell a different kind of story, and we'll circle back to that later. At the center of this story is not really Pilate. The center of the story is about Jesus. The prophet Isaiah told us many years before Jesus about the Messiah, specifically talking about Jesus. In Isaiah 53, he prophesied that the Messiah would be oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. That's exactly what happened to Jesus. I want you to pay attention to this. Jesus doesn't fight back. Because this moment isn't about whether Jesus is being unjustly executed. That's not the point of the story. For Jesus, this is all about setting captives free and destroying the works of Satan. That's what it's about. And this was part of what it was going to take. After leaving Pilate, Jesus is whipped and mocked and forced to carry the cross that he will be nailed to. He's going to be nailed on the cross, and he's carrying it. While he's on that cross, nailed on the cross, in Luke 23, Jesus says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." The soldiers were right below him, gambling for his clothes by throwing dice. Even on the cross, Jesus is forgiving people. Not just the crowd of onlookers, not just the soldiers below him, but he was forgiving people like Claudia, Pilate's wife. He was forgiving people like Pilate. He was forgiving people like me. And he's forgiving people like you. After Jesus dies, his body is placed in a burial cave. And then on the third day, several of the women went to visit the tomb, only to be surprised by an angel who said in Luke 24, "Jesus isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Remember what he told you back in Galilee, that he would rise on the third day." To the crowd of onlookers, the cross obviously looks like defeat. It looks like the Pontius Pilates of the world who were spineless, the Peters of the world who were cowards, the soldiers who were captive to an unjust system, were all going to be permanently stuck as spineless cowards locked in broken systems. But the resurrection of Jesus from the dead after the crucifixion rewrites the whole story. Because Jesus defeated death, that means he made a way for cowards and skeptics and mockers and captives to all be set free. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what happened to Pilate next. But remember this, Pilate was the one most responsible for Jesus' death. Pilate had the highest level of authority in the government at that moment, which means he had the greatest responsibility. He had the power, and he had the final say. He could have let Jesus go. The religious leaders could accuse Jesus. The crowd could make the noise. The soldiers could carry out the orders. But when Pilate was talking to Jesus, he even said this, "Don't you realize I have the power to release you or crucify you?" It was Pilate's responsibility. And this is the tension for us. Because authority does not just belong to governors. You have authority. You have agency in your life over your own decisions. They are yours. Over your own integrity, it is your choice. Over your own response to truth, it is your agency. And with that authority and agency comes responsibility. You may not be Pilate, but every time you choose what's easy over what's true and right, you're standing in the same footsteps of Pilate. You're making the same error. But that's not the end. The story continues. After the crucifixion, there's a resurrection. And after the resurrection, Jerusalem did not calm down. It got louder. The tomb was empty. Disciples were preaching. Rumors spreading everywhere. Jesus is risen. Jesus is risen. After he died, he rose from the dead. This was spreading like wildfire. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Pilate. History tells us this, that Pilate tried to move on. He tried to go back to power, back to Rome. Church history tells us the rest of the story. It tells us that Pilate couldn't just forget about Jesus. He kept remembering him. He remembered the silence of Jesus in trial. He remembered the innocent eyes of Jesus as Jesus looked him straight in the eyes. I can't imagine that if you stood face to face with Jesus and looked him in the eyes that you could ever be the same. The words of Pilate's wife, Claudia, rang deep in his soul. Leave that innocent man alone. Pilate had washed his hands, but there was no way for him to wash his memory. Shortly after the resurrection of Jesus, his wife, Claudia, who warned him not to do it, she becomes a believer. She joins the way of Jesus. She realized that this was not just a man. This was God incarnate. Eventually, Pilate reaches a breaking point in his life. He has all kinds of power, more trinkets and treasures than he could ever need. But he has no peace. He had once come face to face with Jesus, literally seen the face of truth. And he does what he couldn't or wouldn't do before. He repents. And the one who had once handed Jesus over to the angry crowds now bows before the resurrected Jesus. Pilate washed his hands, but the whole time Jesus was getting ready to wash his heart. Throughout history, one day a year, on June 25th, many in the global church commemorate Pilate's repentance and turning to Jesus. It's a significant moment. He's always been the villain in this story. Who knew Jesus had plans for Pilate? As the worship team comes up. Because they believe the story didn't end with failure. The story ends with redemption. And why is that important to us? It's important to us because if God can redeem Pilate's story, then it means that God can redeem our stories too. And in case you missed it, this is the whole point of the cross. Your failures don't have to be the end. Meet Jesus at the cross and Jesus will rescue you. He will redeem your story. Let's reflect on that for a moment today. Are you like Claudia today? Is God like trying to interrupt your life while you were just minding your own business, doing your thing? And now almost suddenly you're consumed with the divine desire to get right with God? Don't run from that. God's talking to you. Maybe you're like Pilate. You know the truth, but you're hesitating. Pressures of family or friends or culture or work, but you know the truth. And now, on Easter, you're face to face with Jesus. What will you do? The author of Hebrews said, just think how much more the blood of Christ will purify your consciences from sinful deeds so that we can worship the living God. You know, Jesus wants to wash us clean. Doesn't matter if you've washed your hands before. Jesus has a bigger plan. Pilate said, I'm innocent of this man's blood. But he wasn't. And neither are we. And here's the good news. It was our sin that kept Jesus on the cross, but it was his love that kept him there. So that by his overcoming death, we could be made free and forgiven. That's Easter. That's Easter. Would you stand with me as we close? would you just close your eyes and bow your heads across the room? Let's just spend a moment to reflect on this. If you've been sensing God interrupt your life like Claudia, I would encourage you to come to Jesus. Run to Jesus. He's calling out to you. He's trying to bring you home. Hear his call. If you're like Pilate and you know the truth but you're hesitating, don't hesitate anymore. Go to Jesus. Turn to Jesus. If Claudia can turn, if Pilate can turn, Peter can be restored, if all the messed up characters in the Bible can get a second chance, then so can you. Jesus is calling you home this Easter. The worship team will close us with this song, but as they do, if you would like to talk to Jesus today, the altars are open. You can come on up and you can talk to Jesus. And just in your own words, tell Jesus what it is that you're responding to him today. If you would like to make him the leader of your life, if you would like to ask him to forgive you of your sins, then in your own words, ask him to do that. Let's just talk to Jesus today. The altars are open.